Ayaan Hirsi Ali was born a Muslim in Somalia, where she saw and experienced the brutal treatment of women and girls under fundamentalist Islam. As a young woman, she escaped from an arranged marriage and sought asylum in the Netherlands, where she rose to become a member of the Dutch Parliament and an outspoken critic of Islam. Based today in Washington, D.C., Hirsi Ali continues to risk her life to expose Islam, a religion that she says subjugates Muslim women to lives of slavery, suffering, and submission. Her latest book is called Critic: Why Islam Needs a Reformation Now. In it, she makes the powerful case that a religious reformation is the only way to end terrorism, sectarian warfare, and repression of women and minorities that each year claim thousands of lives throughout the Muslim world.
Well, this very interesting lady is with us now by satellite from New York, and we welcome you to the 700 Club. You're a terrific author. I've enjoyed both of your books, and thank you for writing them. It took a lot of courage. To tell us about the status of women in Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the various Muslim countries.
Well, in most Muslim countries, especially in those countries where Sharia law or Islamic law is applied, the status of women is dire. Women must have a male guardian. They should ask permission before they even leave the house. If women are raped, then they have to prove their testimony is worth half of that of the rapist. They can inherit only half of what their brother inherits. There's a great deal of violence against women. They have to go out of the house covered from head to toe, ideally with a chaperone. So they're in a permanent house arrest where Islamic law is applied. And there are now Muslim women starting their own movements and trying to fight that back. There are Saudi women who are fighting for the right to drive. There are Egyptian women who are fighting against sexual harassment. 99% of Egyptian women report that they've at one time been harassed or subjected to some form of sexual harassment. There are almost 1,000 honor killings reported in Pakistan, and those are only the cases that are reported. There is so much more. So the position of the Muslim woman in 2015 is extremely dire.
Let me ask you about your case. Your previous book, you talk about being a youngster, young girl, forcibly taken, and they have that procedure. They use the term genital mutilation. It doesn't fully describe what happened. What happened to you then?
Well, I underwent genital mutilation at the age of 5, and along with me, about 120 to 180 million women have undergone that. Not all of them are Muslim, but the majority of the women who have been subjected to this mutilation are Muslim. And I think as you open your newspaper or turn on the television, not a day goes by without people who are Muslim using their faith, using the guidance of the Prophet Muhammad and what they read in the Quran to engage in violence and in oppression and to justify that in the name of religion. And so with this new book, I'm making the point that really the only way out of this vicious cycle of brutality and violence and intolerance is a radical reformation of the faith.
Now, you say, so many people, they say Islam is a religion of peace, and then they say that the ISIS and others, there's just an aberrant group of Islamists. And in your book, you talk about jihadis, and you talk about the culture of death, and you talk about the fact that it comes directly from the Quran, the Hadith, and other writings having to do with Muhammad himself. Could you explain what you're talking about?
Well, I want to start by saying Islam can become a religion of peace once it's reformed, but Islam today, unreformed in its pure form, it's not a religion of peace. I describe in the book 3 sets of Muslims. One set of Muslims who are oriented toward Medina when the Prophet emigrated from Mecca, and he engaged in war. And he, doled out war booty. He beheaded people himself. And so in Medina, there was a period that looked pretty much like what we are seeing now the Islamic State do in Iraq and Syria. But before that, early on in the first 10 years, he was preaching peace and love and, charity, and that was more spiritual, maybe what we would describe as a religion today. And I think that the majority of Muslims are Mecca-oriented, but there is a minority, a disturbing minority, an increasing minority that is using the example of the Prophet Muhammad to carry out undescribable atrocities against women, against Christians, against Yazidis, other religious minorities, against gay people, and it's never ending. Anti-Semitism is back in Europe in a way we haven't seen since 1945, and that is because of the presence of radical Islam there. And the question today is, how do we deal with this? And I think that for 1.6 billion people in the world, the way out of this is a review of their religion and a radical reformation, and that's what I propose in this book.
Well, Muhammad was a fairly illiterate man who married an older woman, and he was her representative around Arabia, collecting some of the money due her. He married a girl when she's 9 years old. He had many other wives. He was a warrior, but yet offense against the Prophet means that you can get killed in the Muslim world. What is the view of Muhammad? It's almost they put him above God himself.
Well, and that is exactly the points that I'm making in the book, that if you look at the life of Muhammad and you try to emulate him and do exactly the same things he did back in the 7th century, then you're going to get what we see now, and it's called the Islamic State. And it's not only the Islamic State. Brunei has just reintroduced Sharia law. Saudi Arabia is run under that law that Muhammad introduced. There are beheadings in Saudi Arabia that take place, pretty much on a daily basis and becoming more frequent. People are hung in Iran, and all of these atrocities, again, justified in the name of Muhammad. So my proposal here in the book, one of the 5 proposals, is it's time for Muslims to change their attitude toward the Quran and Muhammad and to adopt a position where they don't blindly follow in that example, but re-examine it. And that is key. It's the first step. The second point is Muslims, as they are taught today, not just extremist Muslims, but mainstream Muslims, are taught to invest more in life after death than life before death. And this creates, an apocalyptic mindset that needs to be revised. Muslims are taught that they must enjoin right and forbid wrong. That way you have a society of vigilantes. That must go. Muslims are taught that we must do our best to introduce Sharia law. We know that Sharia law is a totalitarian, intolerant, violent system. Look at all the places where it's established. Look at what happens to women, to Christians, to gays, to Jews. Sharia law must go. And finally, jihad, or holy war, that must be replaced with holy peace. Islam today is in a crisis, and the only way out is a reformation.
Let me ask you about the jihad thing. We're told here by the so-called moderate Muslims that jihad is merely a struggle of the soul. You find it not to be the case. What is jihad and what you've experienced?
Jihad is holy war. It's a declaration of holy war on infidels. It's to invite people who are not Muslim to the religion, and if they refuse to take the sword or use violence, and make them an offer, convert, pay a discriminatory tax if you are Christian or Jew, or die. And we see this applied today by this so-called caliphate in Iraq and in Syria. That is jihad. And when moderate Muslims or so-called moderate Muslims say jihad means something else, I just want to tell them denial is not a strategy. The more Muslims deny that there's something inherently wrong with Islam that needs to change, the longer the suffering continues.
Okay.
the more people who die and get oppressed.
If a mother has a son, she would raise him up to be a shaheed, a martyr, and the death is considered good. They look forward to death, and they write about death as opposed to life. Is that what you said in the book about that? You want to talk about it?
Yeah, I say that, we invest, growing up as a Muslim, and in Muslim communities, we are far more invested in life after death than life before death. Young people are taught, especially young boys and young men, the Quran, the Hadith, and the Imams describe in detail all these wonderful rewards that they're going to get. And that renders them to invest more in life after death. You have to ask yourself, why are Muslims who live in peaceful countries like the United States and Europe, why are some of them traveling and sneaking out of these wonderful, stable, prosperous communities and seeking to join the Islamic State? That is because in the mindset of these young people, they want to die as martyrs. They want to die for the caliphate. They want to die for the sake of Allah. So it is now time that we re-examine what Allah says in the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad's example and preach a loving and a peaceful message and a message of life before death.
All right. You lived in Europe, you lived in Holland. What is the current Islamic view of Europe, America, the Middle East, Iraq, Saudi Arabia? What do they intend to do? What's the plan?
Well, there are a lot of Muslims who are leaving because Muslim countries are in a crisis. A lot of Muslims, large numbers, millions of them, leave behind their homelands and emigrate to Europe, and they come to the US in search of a better life. But then there are these clerics, and there is a network of mosques and Muslim centers and madrasas that preach that they should turn on the societies that they have come to, wherein they have come to seek refuge. And I think that it is time that those Muslims who took that step that I took about 24 years ago, that we stand up and say, listen, I think Sharia law is bad, not only for non-Muslims, but especially bad for Muslims, and reject it.
Dar al-Islam, Dar al-Harb, they break the world into two different categories, and if you're not with them, you're at war with them. That's what they teach, isn't it?
Yeah, the people we've now come to call Salafis or radical Islamists, Wahhabis, there are all kinds of labels for them, but the message is pretty much, yes, there is a house of Islam and there's a house of war. And there is this belief that it is the job of those who live within the house of Islam to convert the rest of the world to Islam. And then, the day of judgment will come. It's a very apocalyptic way of thinking, and it's extremely dangerous, as you can see. 20, 30 years ago, people used to think, this is some crazy group, very marginal, just like Jehovah's Witnesses. But now we are seeing that, this radical thought can throw the world into war.
What about Iran? We're negotiating Iran, and the leader of Iran just said, death to America, and here we're trying to make a deal with them. Do you think you can deal with these people?
The Iranian regime, as opposed to the Iranian people, and we really must see this separately. I think that the Iranian people are much closer to accepting the US and the existence of the State of Israel and just want to get on with their lives. But the Islamic Republic, which is this regime, they have promised over and over again death to Israel, death to America. They're in the process of developing a nuclear bomb, and they've made their ambitions very, very clear. They want to eliminate the State of Israel, and I think that it is naive to not take them at their word and think, they've been ambitiously working to this end for the last 34 years, and suddenly they're going to change their minds because we tell them to. I think it would be very naive and trusting of us if we believe the mullahs.
How risky is your life these days? Have you had, how many attempts on your life? You have security, you have guards, or you just going to take what comes? I
have very strict instructions not to talk about my security. But it is very clear that if you want to speak out against, you know, this the violence that's justified in the name of Islam, that the only argument some of these, not all Muslims, but some Muslims want to use is the use of force. And I think we should not give in to terror. We should not give in to threats of force.
Well, you're a terrific figure. We appreciate you being with us. I hope your book is successful. Your other one was excellent. Infidel, it was called. Fascinating. This is called Heretic, Why Islam Needs a Reformation. It may be a little too utopian to hope for, but nevertheless, it's very well presented. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, thank you very much for being with us. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.